One of the questions we get asked most often is how we eat well for not much money.
In today's video, we're going to show you.
Hello, welcome to English Country Life. My name's Hugh.
And my name's Fiona.
And today we want to show you some of the things we do to try and keep our food bills down. Now we know that not everybody lives like we do with a large garden in the countryside.
But hopefully there's one or two techniques that we're going to talk about today and some of the things that we do that everyone can take a little bit of to apply to their own lives.
So let's take a look at how we manage our food bills.
This is our fruit and vegetable patch, and this is the most obvious way that we reduce our food bills. We grow a lot of our own fruit and vegetables. Now over time we've learned a lot of lessons. When we first started out, we basically went to the local garden centre and just picked lots and lots of seeds. We didn't think about what we were buying before in the supermarket that we would eat normally. So as a result, we bought seeds for things which we wouldn't normally have eaten, such as cauliflower. Now cauliflower, don't get me wrong, it's incredibly nutritious, very tasty food, and lots of people love it. But for us, if we see cauliflower on a dinner plate, we don't go, oh, great, cauliflower. It's, okay, cauliflower. But as a result, what was happening with the cauliflowers that we grew is that they ended up going to the chickens as treats because we weren't consuming them. Now, the other thing which we did over time was think about what were we spending the most amount of money on, because it made sense to replace those in our growing space. And for us, it's fruit. Fruit's unbelievably expensive. Think about it. Little punnet of blueberries. 150 grams, maybe £1.99, but you can get a big bag of potatoes for £1. Or around here, because we're in farming country, we can actually buy a 20 kilo sack for £5 only. So it doesn't make sense to grow potatoes, it makes more sense to put the space over to things like blueberries. So let me show you around. We've got two fruit cages here, but this one was never intended to be a fruit cage. It was supposed to be a polytunnel. You know, one of those really cheap ones with the green reinforced plastic covers? All we did was take that plastic cover off and put bird netting over the top. Now it protects our white currants, red currants and black currants from wild birds that want to steal that fruit. And it actually paid for itself in the very first year of us putting it up. This is our second fruit cage. It houses our raspberry and blackberry plants and it's very, very productive. But this structure, unlike the first fruit cage that I showed you, was never intended to be anything other than a fruit cage. And because of that, it was significantly more expensive to buy. Now, having said that, it's paid for itself over the years multiple times over. The amount of raspberries and blackberries we get from this structure is amazing. But of course, we have to preserve them to make best use of it. But Hugh will be showing you some of the preserving methods we use in a later section. This is one of our apple trees, and this greatly reduces our food bill because I love apples. Now most of ours are actually in a chicken field, but they don't have to be grown in a field environment. If you've got a small patio, they can actually be popped in pots. There's lots and lots of dwarf varieties out there that will give lots of fruit in very, very small spaces. We do still grow vegetables, and this is one of the vegetable beds. Now over time we've been moving away from annual vegetables. So for example, parsnips and carrots, you have to sow the seed every single year, but we're moving more towards perennials. So we put the plant in and it keeps cropping year on year on year, and it's self-supporting. Now we've planted asparagus last year and they've started to establish, they've put the roots down, so the first year you don't really get anything, but this year, second year, we should get a reasonable crop from those asparagus plants. But this bed's got something a bit more unusual in it. It's got something called Jerusalem artichoke, and the crop from these is actually a tuberous root. And roasted, they're amazing. They're a great replacement for potatoes, but they're a little bit sweeter and actually just a little bit more unusual. I love them, but the best thing about them is that a small amount planted gives a huge crop of tubers. Then all you have to do is save a small quantity and replant them. So this is what's gone into this bed. And the plants which result from Jerusalem artichokes are phenomenal. They're about 7 foot high and they've got tiny little sunflower flowers on the top. So they do need some support. What we do is tie the tops together of a certain section into a wigwam so they almost self-support themselves. But the roots are well worth putting in. But like all perennial vegetables, they're quite expensive to buy the first time, but they will crop year on year and year, and you never have to reinvest that money or buy more. They're absolutely phenomenal.
I briefly want to touch on food storage. We're out in one of the barns at the moment in the area where we keep our freezers. And I want to talk about sort of 3 topics just quickly. Why we store food, how we preserve food, and how much you need to preserve if you are producing most of your own food and what you're trying to do is keep your bills down and be as self-reliant as possible. Why do we do it? Well, honestly, it is absolutely right that we should eat seasonally where we can. So at this time of year, for example, there's plenty of parsnips in the ground. There's lots of cabbages still in the fields, and kale and cauliflowers, and all of those are delicious and hearty in soups and stews, etc. But I'm going to be truthful as well and say, I want to eat fruit at this time of year. It doesn't seem unreasonable, but honestly, without active preservation, probably the only things that we would have are some of the longer lasting apples stored in drawers. But I want a rhubarb crumble. I want to have some red carrots. Fiona enjoys homemade yoghurt and some fruit compote, and we need fruit to do that. We also need to be able to enjoy meat and out of season vegetables. You know, there are no fresh peas at this time of year, but I want peas for my roast dinner. So that's why we do it. How do we do it? Well, let me give you an example, and it kind of cuts into the whole space argument. Think about for a minute what a weekly shop looks like for your family. And by a weekly shop, I mean all you have to buy in terms of food, and including that, any takeaways, any school lunches, any meals out that you have. Think of the space that takes. Now multiply by 52. And that's how much food you've got to store to feed your family. And it's a massive volume. As an example for us, and it's just the 2 of us, we have a huge chest freezer there. We have 2 big upright freezers here, and that doesn't even scratch the surface of what we need. So how do we do it? Well, we do freeze quite a lot. Some kinds of meats, for example, are best frozen. Some vegetables are best frozen. But we also can a lot of produce because that's shelf stable. It doesn't take up freezer space. We dry a lot of things, particularly fruit and vegetables and herbs. We use things like sand storage where we can to store things like carrots, and ambient temperature storage without too much work really does cut down on the effort involved. So string your onions and hang them from a beam, keep your potatoes in paper sacks but away from rodents, etc. So a whole variety of preserving techniques is the easiest way of making sure that the things you produce can last you through the year. Let's take a very quick look at some of what we do, what we keep in our freezers, what we can, etc. This is the inside of our chest freezer, and there's a few things I want to point out. The first one is get some sort of organisation going if you have a chest freezer. Otherwise things get lost in the bottom, they get buried. Upright freezers are less efficient and therefore cost more money to run, but they're much easier to keep organised. What have we got in ours? Well, the chest freezer for us is predominantly for fruit and veg. So in here you can see things like pumpkins and sprouts and chilies, and over that side there's some broccoli. You can even see here some red and green peppers, and you'll also see things like this wrapped up. What they are is we stew certain things like rhubarb and gooseberries and then freeze them in muffin moulds, silicone muffin moulds. Take them out, wrap them, and then we can have just a little bit of rhubarb, just a little bit of apple sauce, etc. Very, very handy. Now, over time, we are switching away from the vacuum packer to more and more use of reusable boxes, just because it's more environmentally friendly. This is one of our upright freezers. Let's take a look. What we keep in here is a variety of things, of course, but for example, this is a lot of our home-reared chicken. We hatch birds in the spring, and come the autumn we've usually got a surplus of cockerels. We pass some on to other breeders, but there's always more than we need for our own purposes or even for selling, and they become processed as our table birds. We also keep this type of thing. This is pre-prepared bolognese sauce. Bulk cooking, batch cooking, preparing meals in advance really helps us save money, and we will talk about that in a subsequent segment. This is another part of the way that we store the food that we produce for ourselves. I can't get it all in shot, even with a wide angle lens, but you get the kind of idea, don't you? What do we keep in here? Well, some of it is just our ambient stored stuff, things like strings of onions, potatoes that we've produced, carrots, etc. But also a lot of dried stuff. So we dry a great deal of fruit and veg. These are apple rings from the orchard and dried crisp. They'll last for 3 years in just a standard clip-top jar. To get them back to being beautifully soft for pies and crumbles and apple sauce, they just take a few minutes in hot water. Being English, you have to have your pickles and chutneys, of course, and also the normal range of sauces, jams, jellies, marmalades, all of that stuff. The other thing that we do is a lot of what the Americans call canning, and we in the UK, when we still did it, used to call bottling. So we make and pressure can a lot of things like soups. And they're brilliant when you've got a glut of a vegetable, but also when a vegetable's on the turn. So when my onions start to sprout, I'll do a big batch of French onion soup, use them all up, preserve them, and we can eat them later in the year. And then the last thing that we do is a lot of ready meals. So this is beef chili, for example, and it just needs to be emptied from the jar into a saucepan, warm through, bit of rice, hearty, healthy, home-cooked meal. And the thing is, again, pressure can, that will last for literally years. And it's so convenient to help us live the way that we want to live and save money doing so. I'm out in the workshop because I'm going to talk about butchery, and out here is where we do some of our butchery, particularly for larger animals. If that's not a subject you're comfortable with, if you don't want to see images of butchery, if you don't want to hear about dispatching your own animals, I'd advise you just to wind through for 3 or 4 minutes. Completely understand it's not a subject that everybody wants to hear about. On the basis you're still here, I assume you're one of the people who do want to hear about it. Okay. You can save great deal amounts of money raising, slaughtering and butchering your own meat. Now, slaughtering is a bit of a difficult topic, but we'll come on to that. But certainly, for example, if you're going to keep chickens for eggs, ultimately it's going to be cheaper for you to breed replacement chickens than it is to keep buying them in as point of lay. So there's a money saving right there. But when you breed chickens, half of everything that hatches is a cockerel. Well, what are you going to do with them? You might, well, if like us, that you have a good pedigree strain, be able to pass some of those on to other breeders for use and mixing up the genetics in the flocks. But not all. Not all. If we hatch 50, 60 birds in a year, then we've got 25 or 30 cockerels to deal with. And they will all come of size roughly around the same time because we hatch under broody hens in the spring, therefore come the autumn, those birds are sort of ready. So what we choose to do with that is surplus cockerels. We do dispatch them here on the Smallholding, and we use something like this, which is a penetrative captive bolt machine. They're not transported miles and hours to an abattoir. It's all done here. They don't know what's happening, and then we process them as table birds. Now that may worry some people, but as I say, I think even if you just want eggs, how you manage the cockerels is part and parcel of that process, and we've thought long and hard about it. Other things that we do here is we do, or have recently started, for example, processing venison, butchering venison on site. Hopefully in the longer term we may even be able to take our own venison, but that's not the case at the moment. But a whole venison carcass that's been taken as part of a deer management plan, and bear in mind deer do have to be managed because there are no natural predators in the UK, can provide a huge amount of meat for a relatively small cost. And there are lots of other examples of that. Around here, for example, the numbers of wood pigeons are eye-watering. And actually people are very happy for the wood pigeon numbers to be controlled, which provides a source of free meat. And I'm going to be fair, I'm going to be honest here, we still cannot yet produce all the meat that we want. We can't do pigs at the moment. We don't have the right kind of land. So we buy in pork from a wonderful lady called Martha Roberts, but what we do is buy it in large pieces and process it ourselves. So we cure our own bacon. And I'll tell you what, that's a really interesting economic argument, because what we found out is buying in the highest welfare, brilliant quality pork from Martha is actually cheaper by the time we've cured it and sliced it. It's cheaper bacon than some very inferior stuff sold in supermarkets. And a lot of that comes down to, well, how are we saving money on food? And the reality is, of course, that we're putting our own effort into it, which we're not charging for. But what that does do is keep the food bills right down. One of the things that's fundamental to the way that we like to keep our food prices down is batch cooking. And I think there's more than one reason for that, although they kind of all meld into one. But part of the reason is some of the things that I like to eat are time consuming to prepare. So we make sweet and sour sauce from scratch. We make curry sauces from scratch. We make chili from scratch. And it takes several hours to do it right. Now the big thing here though is that although it takes 5 hours to make a batch of French onion soup, it probably only takes 6 hours to make 30 batches of French onion soup, because a lot of the time is not in just the preparation of the ingredients, it's actually in the cooking down, etc. It doesn't take any longer to cook down a big batch than it does to cook down a small batch. So bulk cooking in that way saves us so much time. It's so much more efficient. The other thing which is important when you're growing your own is you tend to grow a glut of something. You get a glut of onions, you'll get strawberries in season when you're making jam, and it's important then to use and preserve that abundance when it's available to you. The other thing, and this is about me being honest, is there are times when I'm out, I'm in the workshop, I'm freezing cold, a job's taken longer than it ought to have taken, and I sort of drag myself in at dusk, and I don't want to start cooking from scratch. I really don't. I'm tired. And if I didn't have things preserved, the temptation would be to get the car out and go for a takeaway or eat rubbish. By preserving some of the great food that we have available to us, it's actually quicker and easier to put a healthy home-cooked meal on the table than it is to drive and get a takeaway. So for us, batch cooking is more efficient, it preserves that seasonal abundance, and it means there's much less temptation to eat unhealthily because you've got so much good food that can be cooked quickly on the table. Well, I hope that's proved useful. It's really only sort of 4 basic techniques, but the combination of those really has made an enormous difference into how much that we have to pay out and into how we eat.
Now we know not everything that we do will apply to everybody, but there will be small elements that everyone can take away to their own lives, so hopefully you can reduce some of your food bills too.
If you've enjoyed today's money saving content and you'd like to see some of the ways that we're trying to keep the bills down that aren't just about food, let us know in the comments down below. And if you want to see those kind of videos and everything else we produce, just tap on that subscribe button, hit the bell next to it, you'll hit every time we upload a new video.
And don't forget, if you have liked this content, give us a thumbs up down below. But for now, thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Take care.